This Christmas season, please consider gifting an Unfound YouTube channel membership or Patreon membership to that true crime fan in your family. On August 11th, 2017, Unfound first released its coverage of the disappearance of Erin Gilbert, an episode called The Last Place. She was a 24-year-old woman from San Francisco. She was athletic and loved to shoot pool. During 1995, she was in Anchorage, Alaska, spending time with family. On July 1st, she went on a date to the town of Girdwood. While there, Erin and her date got separated. She was never seen again. Today, Unfound revisits Erin's case with new commentary to hopefully reignite inquiries into what happened. I'm Ed Densel, and this is Unfound. I'll never be a big world traveler. Even if I hit Powerball, I don't think I'd venture outside the confines of the United States. Does that make me an arrogant American? I mean, I don't speak any other languages. I haven't even been to all 50 states yet. And then there's that whole flying thing. 9 or 10 hours in a jet. Forget it. But it could also be that I read the news like all of you. A person could start to wonder whether there is any place a person can have a safe vacation. For example, Cancun, a popular place for spring break at one time. The drug wars in Mexico are slowly taking over that beach town. The Philippines, an exotic vacation destination with beautiful islands and plenty of history concerning World War II. But these days it seems to only get into the news due to bombings. Europe. It's almost on a weekly basis that terrorists pop up in the news, hijacking of a truck and running dozens of people over, the Paris attack involving the Bataclan Theater, and yes, even here in the United States, its number one vacation destination, Orlando, had the Pulse nightclub attack. Where is a person supposed to go to have a good time without any worry? I bring this up because Erin Gilbert was on a kind of vacation. Yes, she was working in Alaska, but it was a chance for her to see a new part of the world and to spend time with her family. And as she left San Francisco to move to Anchorage, I'm sure running into any danger was the last thing on her mind. And in fact, going to Girdwood on July 1st, 1995, it's the last place a person would think a disappearance would occur. But it did. And her family is still looking for answers 22 years later. However, it could be that Girdwood wasn't as safe as everyone thought. And now a summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Megan Good's site, charleyproject.org. Erin had resided in Alaska for about a year prior to her disappearance. Before then, she lived in San Francisco. She had decided to travel north to spend time with her sister Stephanie, whose husband was in the Air Force in Anchorage. This would also give Erin some time to get to know her sister's children, who were very young at the time. Erin got a job on the base as a nanny and seemed to be enjoying her time there. The Tuesday prior to her disappearance, Erin had visited a local bar by herself to shoot pool. While there, she met Dave Combs, a local young man in the metal business. They hit it off. And a few days later, Dave called Erin to see if she'd like to go to the Girdwood Forest Fair, 40 miles south of Anchorage. She accepted. July 1st, he picked her up. While in Girdwood, Dave's car developed problems with a battery dying. He claims he went to go find jumper cables at some cabins nearby. When Dave returned, Erin was gone. Searches conducted in the days after turned up no signs of Erin, although a couple of vendors at the fair insisted they saw and talked to Erin on July 1st. Since 1995, there have been no new leads in Erin's case. According to public reports, Dave Combs is not considered a suspect in her disappearance. Erin's family believes she met with foul play and is deceased. The interview for this episode is with Stephanie Juarez, Erin's sister. Unfound News. I recorded the new part of this episode in Greeley, Colorado. I'm here to appear in a series concerning the murder of Janelle Matthews. It is called The Girl on the Milk Carton, and it will be coming out in 2024. Next, to finish out 2023, Unfound will be featuring a new disappearance next week. Then we will complete the year by airing update episode number 16. Lots to tell all of you, of course. Finally, by the time you hear this, I will be in Pennsylvania. I will be there until around December 27th. I plan to do a lot of stuff and see a lot of people. I'm very fortunate to have on this episode of Unfound Stephanie Juarez, sister of Erin Gilbert. Stephanie, welcome to Unfound.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Stephanie, tell the listeners a little bit about your sister, Erin. Maybe to start out, was she your older sister or younger sister?
There were three sisters. There's myself, who's the oldest, Catherine, who is in the middle, and Erin was the youngest sister out of all three of us. So.
And the age difference between all three of you?
I was born in 1967, Catherine was born in 1970, and Erin was 1971. So just a few years between all three of us.
All right, so about 4 years. What was Erin like? If the listeners would have had the chance to meet Erin, what kind of person would they have encountered?
They would love her. She was an athletic person, very outgoing. She was the person, if you walked into a party, she would be the one that would walk up to you. She was always very interested in what you were doing, just had a kind word to say about everybody, but also not afraid to ask a tough question, if you will. She was very athletic, very smart, had, I believe, probably a 3.9 or 4.0 in high school, star of most of the teams that she played on, basketball and volleyball and track and softball. I had a recent email from a friend of hers who said when they played softball, they were not very good, but Erin was really the team, and so if they actually caught the ball, they just threw it to Erin to make sure that they made the play. So I thought that was kind of a funny story. She was interested in poetry and photography. She modeled. We always sort of joked. She modeled in San Francisco and did some clothing lines and some things, but she actually made a lot of money on being a hand model. So we always teased her about that. We're like, yeah, you're this really famous model, but you actually make more money being a hand model. So we always thought that was funny.
That's interesting.
Just a really likable person. She had a lot of friends. So it was really tragic when she became a missing person because, we were all just heartsick about it. We were very close sisters, close family. We did everything together. She was a great aunt to my kids, took them to museums and played with them all the time. So she was really just a missing link in our family and still is today. So.
Is there maybe a particular memory that comes to your mind when you think about her, maybe like from a vacation or, maybe a summer day or something funny, a story between you and her and your other sister that comes to mind all these years later? Something that comes to mind.
I went to college in Tacoma, Washington at PLU, and she would come and visit us down there, and sometimes all three of us would go jogging on the waterfront, and every time we walked by or jogged by somebody, she would always say, "Top of the morning to you," and we used to tease her all the time. We'd say, "Why do you keep doing that?" And she would just say, "Because I just like to talk to people." So kind of a funny story.
Top of the morning. I think that's kind of a British saying. That's interesting.
I think it is. Yeah, I thought English or some sort, but she was just very friendly and just outgoing. Just a great sister.
And she went to school. Did you say she went to college?
She went to college out in Baltimore. My dad lived out in Baltimore for quite a long time. He recently just moved back to California to retire. But she went to a community college out there and played volleyball. I don't remember the name of the school, but she did play out there. And then lived in San Francisco for a little bit, and then came up to see us when my husband was stationed up at Elmendorf in Alaska.
What was her major? How did she do in college? And
I think she was writing. I think, English, an English major was where she was at that time.
And how long after school did she end up going to Alaska, and how did that all come about? It seems strange to me that, I've never been to Alaska, but a girl decides to go to Alaska. It seemed to me that during the summer, maybe there would be more action, more fun in Washington. Maybe I have that wrong.
No, she was actually in San Francisco, and my dad ran a youth hostel down there in the Mission District, and she lived down there. So she had, and then they moved out to Baltimore. So she kind of moved with him and then went back to San Francisco and had some friends down there, worked and did some modeling. And then just decided to come up to visit us. Alaska, people want to go up and visit and see what it's like. And she was adventurous. And so she just came up to visit us and then ended up staying. So she really liked it up there. It was beautiful country. And my husband traveled a lot, so she got to stay with myself and the kids. And we had a really good time. So she actually got a job when she got up there as a nanny for two doctors that were in the Air Force. And so she went out to their house to nanny during the day and worked up there doing that. So.
Okay, so she comes up there, she's staying with you, she gets this job, and how was she doing up there? I mean, did she enjoy it? Did she plan on staying
Yeah,
for a while? I mean, had she not disappeared, do you think that that's something that she would have stayed in Alaska, or do you think that she would eventually move back to the lower 48?
I think she liked being a nanny. She had talked about going to beauty school. She was young, kind of trying to figure out what she wanted to do with her life. And so she was with us, working, saving money. My sister had made a comment about this too, that she didn't tell anybody she wanted to leave Alaska. She was pretty happy up there. She really liked the little girl that she was nannying for. She really loved that family. We had a really good routine going on there at the time that she disappeared. So, but we had a lot of questions about that. Like, did she want to leave? Do you think she took off? And we're like, there was zero inclination that she would have left. And we were all really, really close. So we didn't, feel like we had secrets between us or anything like that. So.
Did she make some friends while she was up there? Did she go out on any dates or anything? You're telling the listeners she was a model, tall girl, 5'11". Did she have? I mean, what kind of social life did she have there?
We kind of hiked a lot and hung out with the family quite a bit. I think she had become, a little bit bored and wanted to go out and meet somebody. And I think that was really the first time she had gone out, was to see if she could meet some people. And that's when she went out and met some people. And that's when she met Dave Combs.
And that'll take us right to that. What can you tell us about those days before she disappeared? She had gone out and she met Dave, and how did that happen?
Well, she went out and she wanted to play some pool, and so she went to a bar in Alaska, and she didn't even stay out particularly late. I think she even got home by about 10 or 11. And she came home, and I said, well, how did it go? And she said she goes, I met this guy, and I don't really know anything. I don't know if it's going to work out or anything. And she said, if he calls me, great. If not. She didn't seem overly excited about it, or like this was like the guy of her dreams or anything. So, sisters talk, and it was just sort of, just someone she met and didn't make a huge deal out of it. And then a few days later, he called and asked her if she wanted to go to the Girdwood Forest Fair. So I believe she went out maybe like on a Tuesday night, and they went out that following Friday. And it was 4th of July weekend in 1995, so I remember that date pretty clear.
July 1st. Yeah. Had she been to this bar before, or was that do you think that was the first time her going there? You had told me in a prior conversation she liked to shoot pool, and in fact she had her own pool stick. So is this a place that she had gone to shoot pool before?
I was talking to my husband about that, and I think that maybe all three of us had gone there maybe once or twice before. The three of us had gone to go out, if I had lucky enough to get a babysitter. The three of us went there. But I think it was her first time going there by herself that I can remember.
And so she met Dave. He might have been there. I don't know if he was by himself or he was there with friends. I'm not sure if you know that or not. But somehow those two met, and he might have made a little bit of an impression on her. She comes home. She tells you about this guy. Do you think that she was surprised when he called her a few days later?
I think she was a little bit surprised. I think he had her phone number, so she obviously had given it to him. And yeah, I think a little bit. And so she was a little bit excited to go. You know, she hadn't really gone out with anybody since she had moved up to Alaska. And so I think it was something, you know, a little bit exciting. And she, she went. So she was excited to go.
And so on July 1st, they made a date, I guess you'd call it. He came and picked her up, and they went up to Girdwood. How far was that from where you live? What can you tell the listeners about Girdwood and the Girdwood Fair?
Well, we lived on Elmendorf Air Force Base, and I believe it's about 35 minutes, maybe 40 minutes up to Girdwood. He picked her up at 4:00, and we were all kind of curious about him, so we were standing outside of our house, and I remember my son, who was 4, was running around and kind of joking with her aunt and said, "Where are you going? Maybe you should bring a cell phone." I really remember that clearly now that she didn't take one with her at the time. And we were kind of checking him out a little bit, and I remember thinking, I was not too impressed with him. He was kind of a tall guy, kind of dark jacket, longer hair. I didn't think he was all that attractive, but I thought, my sister, to each their own. So I didn't really think too much, but it was a little concerned. So again, they left our house at about 4, and I would imagine they got up to Girdwood about 4:45. It's a drive. It's a very pretty drive up along the coast in Alaska. And Girdwood is a ski resort town. So it's I had not been to the forest fair. We weren't from Alaska, so I wasn't familiar with it. But I imagine, they had food and some bands and just different selling different things around in the forest. So when she told me she was going, I was like, oh, okay. And so.
Did you think that was a little, you had told me, if we could talk about this for a moment, you had thought maybe it was a little strange that they would go there. To me, you made it sound like that wasn't something that maybe 20-something-year-olds would go to.
Yeah, I do remember that. I thought to myself, if you're going to meet somebody, maybe they take you to dinner, they take you to a movie, or, you're in Alaska, maybe, go to a lake or something. But it seemed, I was a little concerned because it was so far out of town and I didn't really know what that was about. So it seemed a little odd to me that would be where you'd go on your first date. So.
Okay. Did you get the impression that Dave had ever been up to Girdwood before?
I assumed he had because he knew about the fair and he was from Alaska. So I thought, well, I guess he knows what he's doing. If he wants to go up there, maybe this is something people do up here. Again, we weren't from Anchorage, and so I didn't really know, events that went on and such, if you will. So I thought, okay, that's kind of interesting. But again, thought it was a little different.
Okay. So he picks her up, and we're going to skip ahead a little bit because you didn't, of course, find out about the actual facts and what, and I think some of the facts are actually still in dispute 22 years later. But after he picked her up and they went on their way, at what point did you start to worry about Erin, that she hadn't come home? When did it kind of kick in?
Well, I guess if they probably got up there about 4:45, I remember thinking the night before, it's about 10, and I went to sleep. So I fell asleep, I think around 9:30 or 10, and then got a call at 7 a.m. the next morning from Dave Combs wondering if she had made it home. And I immediately panicked. I went into her room down the hallway and she wasn't there. And I thought, oh my gosh, I knew something at that moment had gone wrong because I knew my sister would come home. I knew that she wouldn't stay down there. If there was an emergency, she would have called. I mean, I knew something immediately was wrong. So he said they got separated, and I didn't believe him. I just thought something has gone horribly wrong. I immediately knew that.
Did he expound on that? This maybe just ask you this: how long did that phone call last? When he called you to tell you that they got separated the day before, July 1st, do you remember how long that phone call lasted?
I think it was about 5 minutes at the longest, because I just immediately panicked. I just thought, I got to get off the phone, and I knew I had to get to Girdwood, because I thought my gut was, he's not going to help us because he didn't know where she was at. And I hung up pretty quick and got ready. We had 2 small children, got them ready, and we drove up to Girdwood quick. So.
Did he give you any explanation of how they got separated at that point at 7 a.m. on July 2nd? Did he give you a specific that these are the facts? We got there, we went in there, I turned around, she left. Did he say anything like that?
I've thought about this a lot, and I don't think we talked about it, because I think that I got up there and my gut said he had done something to her, or he knew what had happened and maybe something had gone wrong and he wasn't going to tell me. I just instinctually knew that. So I don't think we had that conversation. In fact, I didn't really get the facts until the FBI told us what he said. We never spoke, because I knew I was too afraid to really even have a conversation with him, because I thought, is this person a murderer? Did he kill my sister? So I was not going to be anywhere near him.
Just to be clear, for the record, at that point when he called you, you did not accuse him of anything. You, of course, naturally had suspicions, as anybody would, but that does not mean that he had anything to do with it. But at that point, you did not accuse him of anything or anything like that. You were very oriented toward just jumping in the car and getting to Girdwood.
No, not at all. There was zero conversation. In fact, we've never had that conversation to this day.
Okay. So you jump in the car. Does your husband go with you?
He did. My husband and 2 young children went with us. Again, we didn't know anybody up there, and it was 7 o'clock on a Saturday morning. So we just went together, and we drove into Girdwood and stayed there. And we also called the police on the way there. And they told us that because she was 24, they had to wait 48 hours, and and it was 4th of July weekend, and they were busy. So that was the response that we got. So I guess if you can imagine being in a strange town, going to a place I had not been before, and trying to find your sister with zero help, it was a pretty frightening situation. So my husband dropped me off right at the front of the forest fair. I walked in, and I remember seeing a stage, and there was a microphone up there. And so I found who was ever in charge of that. And I said, she was here last night. Can you call her name out and try and find her? She was missing. And so they were very nice, and they did that and stopped. They were playing some music, and they stopped and announced her name. And, nobody came forward who had seen her. And so my husband and I walked in the woods quite a bit. There was a creek I remember going through. We walked along the creek, and we just were stuck. We just did not know what to do. So we stayed there for a while, and then we drove home and called relatives and said, hey, this is what's going on. And my dad immediately flew out from Baltimore to help us. And about 3 days later, we finally went to the news station and said, here's what happened. And then we were able to get some help from the FBI, because she was actually a California resident. And because she had crossed state lines, became an FBI missing persons case. And that's when we really got some help. But again, it was pretty late.
I want to go back to when you first got there. You actually saw Dave when you got there. What can you tell listeners about that?
I did see him there. And I do remember walking up to him, and I don't remember what I said to him, but I do remember he was walking across a bridge, and he was eating a hot dog. And if you can imagine, my sisters were like my kids. I felt very protective over them, and I just remember thinking, he's eating a hot dog and I'm about ready to throw up because I'm so panicked that I can't find my sister. And he seemed unusually calm, and that's when I thought something's just not right. And so I don't remember what he said, but we didn't talk for very long, and then I went back to find my husband.
Is it your impression? I mean, he didn't live in Girdwood. He
No.
lived down near you. He called you at 7 a.m. that morning. Where did he call you from?
It's a great question. I'm not sure if he was down there or if he was back in Anchorage and drove back down. I don't remember that. I don't remember if we talked about that.
Because it would seem crazy to me, and maybe the listeners are thinking about this as well, is that if he drove the whole way back down to the Anchorage area, calls you at 7 a.m., you, of course, jumped in the car probably within 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And he seemingly still beat you up to Girdwood, if not got there around the same time.
Right. Yeah. I didn't really think about that. But he was definitely in the Forest Fair. I mean, I saw him in there. So
it would lead me to, I have to tell you that it would lead me to believe that maybe he never went back to Anchorage that night. Maybe he stayed up there somewhere.
He may not have. He may have stayed up there. But again, I think I was in such a, I was 26 and I was in a panic to try and find my sister. And again, I think what's so hard to grasp about this is that until it actually happens to you, you're put in a position where you are so frightened and you are trying to find somebody and you don't feel like you have any help in the world. You just kind of panicked. And I know I did, and probably should have asked some better questions and such, but I just was like, I got to find her. And so I just thought, and I remember thinking too, she's got to be here somewhere. But I also felt like I knew something had gone terribly wrong, because she would have called us to say she wasn't coming home, or she just would have come home.
So you talked to Dave. He called you at 7 a.m. that morning and really was not very specific about what happened. And then you saw him face to face. You got to look him right in the eye up there in Girdwood. Mm-hmm. At that point, did he tell you what happened?
I don't think he did, because I don't feel, again, like I knew that information until the FBI told me that information. I don't think I asked.
When you were going through the fair, that of course was still going on that next day, you're looking for, did you happen upon anybody who saw Erin in the fair the day before?
I did not. There were so many people there, and so it just felt pretty overwhelming. We went up, I think because I had gone to where the microphone was at, and asked the fair, whoever was in charge of it, to say, hey, can you call her name out? When no one came, we just walked around for a while, and then we went back because we just didn't know what to do.
Mm-hmm. And so tell the listeners a little bit about, of course, you went up there July 2nd. Of course, did not have a lot of luck. How did the police, you told me that the police, of course, kind of blew you off a little bit. And then they finally got involved when you went to the media TV station up there. What went on then?
A girlfriend of my neighbor and I walked in. We drove to I remember very clearly, I walked into the news station and they had all the cubicles sitting around, and I just said, kind of not in a loud, not yelling or anything, I just said, hey, I need somebody who can come and help me. I've got a missing person and I really need some help. And then a couple of reporters came over and chatted with me, and then we were able to get it on the news. And once it hit the news, it took off pretty well, because then the police, obviously came to our house, the FBI came to our house, and we had a lot of notoriety and a lot stories that played on TV. We got the FBI did flyers and kind of gave some instruction on how to handle the situation. So that when we went to that news station is really when we started to get some help. And I believe that was probably on Monday, because again, it was the 4th of July weekend and everything was closed. So.
And what did the police and the FBI do? Do you think that, of course, unfortunately, Erin's case is still unsolved. Do you think that the FBI added anything to the investigation? I mean, what were your impressions of them? Because I have to tell you that I've probably only dealt with maybe one or two other cases on Unfound so far where the FBI was actually involved. What can you tell the listeners about the FBI in this circumstance?
Um, my gut says is that because we went to the media, somebody at the state trooper's office got a phone call and said, "What the heck is going on?" Is how it appeared to me. I don't know if that's exactly what happened. But then we were told that because Erin had crossed the state line, that's when the FBI takes over the case, is what we were told. So the FBI came in, they interviewed everybody in our family, and kind of started there. I know that they went to interview Dave Combs, and he was even going to take a polygraph test, but I guess he walked into the state trooper's office and his attorney said, "Don't do the polygraph test." And because we did not have any physical evidence, we could not, there's a right to incriminate. We couldn't do anything. We didn't have it. We didn't have a stitch of evidence. We didn't have a body. We didn't have clothing, blood. We didn't have anything. And so he had the right to walk out of there, and then they couldn't, the FBI and state troopers couldn't do anything. So that's really when we hit a wall.
Did the police or the FBI find out anything about Dave Combs in those days and weeks after her disappearance that caught your attention? I mean, obviously, when he came to your house and picked Erin up on July 1st, you virtually knew nothing about him. Right. Did you learn more about him in those weeks, or did that take some time before you found out what his job was, and if you had any brothers or sisters or anything like that? Did you find out any of that information?
That took time. I mean, we were not given any information, and again, I think it was because it was an open investigation. They were trying to keep, the information that they did have private, so that they would only have access to that information. I didn't find out anything about where he worked or anything up until really probably 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, when I just started to kind of dig into the case again and found out that his family has a Combs metal business in Anchorage, and that sort of thing. But again, not a whole lot about him personally. So
okay,
which made it all the more tough. So
did I misunderstand you? You had told me, you'd said that nobody had seen her in the fair, but I just want to clear something up. I thought you had told me in a prior conversation that somebody had recognized her. Was that something that the FBI told you later? Maybe you can clarify that at this point.
Yeah, sure. No, I did tell you that. Erin stopped by a tattoo table, if you will, or a vendor up there, and the police had told us that the vendor had recognized her and actually had a conversation with her. I couldn't really tell you. I think they just talked about tattoos. Erin had a rose tattoo kind of by her shoulder. And I think that they had a conversation about that, but that was about all that I knew. That vendor did call me a few years ago and said, "Hey, I always wondered if they had found her," and I was the last one to talk to her, and I think she said that they had talked about getting a tattoo or about the tattoo business or something. So yeah.
Okay, did you find out that vendor had seen her when you went up on July 2nd, or is that something you found out later, or was that something that the FBI found out?
I believe that's something the FBI found out. I didn't find that out. They must have told me that. Yeah.
Okay, so the FBI went through the fair, happened upon this vendor who he or she thought that Erin had stopped by that booth on July 1st and had talked to them, at least for a little bit.
Right, and maybe I should go back a little bit to a few things that the police did tell us. I believe Erin and Dave got there around 4:45, and then went into the fair for a little while together, and then went back to the car, and that's when he said that the lights had been left on and the battery was dead. So I did find that out when I did call up there.
When you called up there, when?
Just like a week and a half ago.
Okay, so
Sorry if I'm jumping around a little bit.
That's fine. So what happened was you went up there, searched for a few days. The FBI is there, and then at some points the police did talk to Dave, and his story was
Yeah.
that yes, they did go into the fair, and however long, an hour, or 2 hours, or whatever, and then they came back out. And when he came back out, he discovered that he had left the lights on in his car. The battery was dead. He
Right.
goes somewhere, maybe to get jumper cables or something. He comes back. She's gone.
She's gone. So what is curious to me about the story, I guess, a little bit is in Alaska, it's light until 11 o'clock at night. So I was a little curious why that. I was also a little curious they were only in the fair for an hour. That seemed like a really short period of time to drive 40 miles out of town. They only go in for an hour and then they come back out. When I was talking to my dad about just kind of refreshing our memories about this part of the story, my dad made the comment that that Erin would have gone out of the car and tried to fix the car herself. She was just that kind of a person. And I always also thought she would have never stayed at the car. She would have went with him because she just wasn't somebody who was going to sit and kind of wait. She would have either asked somebody for some jumper cables herself, or she would have walked with him to go get the jumper cables. I didn't understand a reason why she would stay at the car. That was always a curious part of the story for me.
Did you get the impression when the police did tell you this like a week and a half later, did you get the impression that they believed it or they didn't believe it? Maybe just a gut reaction to it.
I got the impression they didn't believe it. That was my gut. They didn't say that, but that was just my gut.
Okay. Is it possible that the story might have been true and Dave did go to get cables because you had been told that Erin was seen talking to this person at this tattoo parlor in the fair, but she was sighted, but Dave was not seen with her? Is it possible that he left to go get the cables and she decided, you know what, in the meantime, I'm just going to go back in and look around, and that's why Dave wasn't seen with her at that point? Is that possible?
It's a great point that you bring that up, because when I asked the new detective on the case to review the summary, he thinks that they were at the tattoo desk together and then went back to the car together is what he understood the summary to read from the interview, from the questioning, if that makes sense.
Okay, and later in this interview, we're going to talk about the new detective on the case. Okay, to this day, do you have? You had said that earlier in this interview about the FBI, and the impression that you've given, I guess, is that Dave Combs' his story has changed a little bit. Can you give how his story has changed and maybe different versions of what happened that day?
I think there's a few different versions that I thought, and again, it's been 22 years, but the version I thought is that he told the police that their car had broken down on the side of the road on the way to Girdwood. And I really thought that I believed that part of the story for about 15, 20 years even. When I had the detective go through the summary again, this was sort of a second story, if you will, that he told about the car breaking down at the fair. So there's definitely some different versions of what happened, and I had always thought, how could a car that's driving have a dead battery? I didn't get that. But he then said, no, it broke down in there. So I do think that there's a few different versions of what happened, because it's a pretty key point of them getting separated. I thought, did she hitchhike? Did she was she stuck? I mean, I really thought she maybe got into a car because she was stuck on the side of the road, and he said, no, they were actually in there. But I do think when he was questioned that there were a few different versions of what happened at that point. The car is a pretty key point to the story.
I agree. And if the listeners go out and start doing their own research on Erin's case, they're going to find, if you go to the popular forums or sites out there like Charley Project, Web Sleuth, Reddit, some other places, that there are different versions of what happened. You're going to read the battery died version. You're going to read the car broke down on the side of the road version. And there might even be a third version out there as well. And I guess
Right.
the reason these versions exist is because, at least to your knowledge, do you to this day exactly know where Dave Combs' car was parked when he said it broke down?
I don't. I don't know that.
And the
I
police
don't know at
or
all.
the FBI have never told you that in the last 22 years?
No. No. So it's got to be. It's obviously that's the question
Right. Okay.
that we don't have an answer to.
Okay. Um, being that Dave had asked Erin to go up to Girdwood for this fair, I think that, as you said before, it's reasonable to believe that he had been there before. Maybe he'd been to the fair before, maybe in a prior year or something. And this is going to take
Yeah,
us
for sure.
to another part of this. It's going to be at least a little conspiratorial, maybe a tiny bit, but it is relevant. Dave actually knew people up in Girdwood, Alaska, didn't he?
Yeah, I believe he went to Diamond High School. I believe he lived kind of on the hill as you're going out to Girdwood. There's an area actually fairly close to where the business is, and I believe he knew the community out there. He went to high school there. His family lived there. They ran a business there. So I believe he probably had friends up in Girdwood. Probably had cabins up there. Yeah, I think there was probably a lot more to it, I guess, that I didn't know living there because we were new to the area and obviously didn't know Dave at all.
Okay. You had gotten a call from a woman in Oregon. And what can
Yeah.
you tell the listeners about this? And this kind of takes us in, and we're going to talk about two names that people should know: Ted Stevens and Joseph Boehm, Boehm. What did the woman in Oregon that called you tell you?
Yeah, I got a call a few years ago, sort of out of the blue, that there are quite a few missing people, not only in Alaska, but specifically in Girdwood that have disappeared. And she had hired a private investigator, and they, put together kind of a board that, how can we find some similarities with these ladies who have disappeared, and are there any connections? And the connections that she found were Ted Stevens and Joseph Boehm. Specifically, Joseph Boehm had owned Alaska Industrial Hardware. They were part of the community up there. They knew Ted Stevens and they knew Bill Allen, who was an oil guy up there. So some pretty wealthy people. And she told me that there were parties at Ted Stevens' cabin, and that these people were sort of into some drugs, and I'm not saying specifically Ted Stevens, but just maybe the kids of these people, and there was just sort of a culture up there that was going on. And so I looked it up. I thought, okay, this is some pretty big names. This is
Yeah, maybe we should say that Ted Stevens is a former senator from Alaska. He is
right.
dead now. He died in a plane crash in 2010, but he had come under some allegations of corruption, and he actually lost his reelection not long before he died in the plane crash. So the last few years of his time as a senator from Alaska, he had gotten in some trouble, and it did involve this other guy, Joseph Boehm. So I just wanted to clear up if people don't know who Ted Stevens is. So please
Yeah,
continue.
thank you.
Do you, just for the record, you'd never heard of this woman before? Did you check her out to make
I
sure that
had
she was
not.
telling the truth? Or I mean, what kind of research did you do, if you could, on her? And we don't want to say her name before you kind of went down this path.
Yeah, I totally was skeptical as well because, over the years, people will write stories about missing people. And, I was like, how did this gal even get my phone number? But she had looked up Erin is how she found me, and then found my name, looked me up on Facebook is how she found me. But I did go back. I looked at the names that she had given me and some of the people who had disappeared. And I have also, if you just go to Alaska State Troopers, they have missing people on there. So I had already done some of that research. and knew that there were quite a few girls that had disappeared in Girdwood. So when she called me and said, hey, I've got some theories, I had already kind of gotten to that point. So what she told me, I sort of knew. I did not know about the Ted Stevens, Joseph Bowman, Bill Allen case, because it was a huge case up there. So I did do the reading on that, and she was pretty dead on about some of the culture and the partying and stuff that had gone up there. So it was just a piece of information that I had not been privy to because I just didn't know the area up there. So that's what I did. And what she told me, I knew a lot of it, but I had never been able to connect Erin to some of these people or the area, again, just because I didn't know them and still don't know them very well. But she was helpful in the fact that a few years ago, we did go up to the cabins that were behind the Girdwood Forest Fair, and we went to Ted Stevens' cabin. We looked around up there just because I hadn't done it before. So we went up on the sky cam up at Alyeska. We looked over the area and just some things that we had not done before. So
okay, let's go. Let's come back to this second. But in that time, let's say between late 1995 to 2000, let's say 10. Okay. Were there any leads, any suspicions? Did the police or the FBI come to your family and say, we're looking at this guy, this thing popped up, we're looking at maybe a serial killer? Did anything like that go on in those 15 years?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Dead silence.
Dead silence. I had sort of on my own looked if I heard if there was a serial killer, and then again had gone through all those people because there are a ton of people who have disappeared up there. I looked at all of them. I tried to connect them, and I think what I found is that Erin just didn't connect. There was no connection between maybe an Alaska Native person or a prostitute or somebody who had a drug problem. I couldn't connect even where we lived. I mean, I looked at every type of angle, and I just couldn't connect it. Again, I'm not a professional detective or anything, but did my best because I knew that there just wasn't anything going on up in Alaska as far as a lead or anything. So I thought if someone's going to find her, it's going to have to be me and my family.
And I'm sure you have heard, and I know a lot of the listeners have heard about this. I have a lot of very educated listeners when it comes to disappearances. You've probably heard of the Highway of Tears, these women who have disappeared along that stretch of highway up there, very desolate parts of North American continent. You don't believe that there was no connection that you've ever been told about with the police or the FBI that they think that Erin could have been part of that?
No, we couldn't find anything, and I did ask those questions a couple years ago. I didn't ask them, right when she disappeared. I wasn't really familiar with missing people at all. But I looked up a lot of those cases and the people, and I couldn't find a college student. I couldn't find somebody who maybe lived on the Air Force Base. I just couldn't find anything because it seemed like those people just had some different stories than Erin had. So, and even when you look at the pictures of the missing people, she doesn't fit in, and she does stand out as somebody who's just different from that. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's kind of where my head was at when I was looking through all this stuff.
Okay. Getting back to Ted Stevens and Joseph Boehm, the connection we're making here is that you believe that Dave Combs was actually friends with some of maybe Ted Stevens' children and maybe some younger people who knew Joseph Boehm, and they had these cabins up in Girdwood.
Right. So in Alaska Industrial Hardware, I mean, Dave Combs is a metal, he does a metal business. I mean, that's what he does. And so I would imagine if this people lived up on the hill and he went to high school with them and he's doing the same type of work, I just believe they at least knew each other. And, young kids going up to people's ski cabins and they're skiing up there and drinking and having parties, that's not a hard connection for me to make, that maybe Erin would have gone to one of those cabins if she was taken there. So that was one thing I thought, that's a possibility. So that's why we went up to just kind of look around. Not that I knew what I was looking for or was going to find anything, but I just felt like when I go to Girdwood, I have to walk that area because I feel like she was there. And is there anything that I could find or see or listen to from somebody or anything that would help me figure out the answer to where she is?
Yeah, and we're not going to necessarily include Ted Stevens in this, but Joseph Boehm, there were allegations that he was involved with underage girls and drugs and
Yep.
prostitution. And if any of the listeners want to look into it, you will see the connection between Ted Stevens. There was the allegation, I think that was true, that Ted Stevens had some work done on his place in Girdwood, elsewhere, by Joseph Boehm Industrial Hardware, paid
Right.
for by the taxpayers. He should have been paying for himself. And
Hmm.
then once they started looking at Joseph Boehm, they found all these other crazy things going on underneath the
Yeah.
surface.
And that Dave Combs said he went to a cabin to go find help. So he did. I do remember him saying that. That was part of one of the stories that was told. So when this gal called me a few years ago and said, "Hey, did you know about the cabins?" that clicked for me because I was like, he said he went to a cabin, but I don't know any more of the investigation that went off with whose cabin he went to. That's just private police information that I don't have.
Okay. Now, everybody should also know that Joseph Boehm is not with us either. He has died. And he said something on his deathbed. What did he
He
say?
did.
What did he
He
say?
said he said he knew where the girls in Girdwood were, something like that. I mean, pretty close to that. He knew where the dead girls were, and that is another reason that prompted this gal down in Oregon to call me, because she knew that Erin had disappeared in Girdwood. So um, that's again why she called as well. That was actually the main reason she called, is because he had said that on his deathbed. And again, that was like, oh my gosh, what a piece of information. And so that's when I started to kind of dig in to what Dave Combs, like, what is he doing now? And could I connect it? And again, maybe a bit of a stretch, but I think probably not a stretch, that he knew these people up there, and that, it's a ski resort town. People are at a bar. They're maybe drinking. They're having parties at cabins. And then Erin was there with somebody who knew all these people. So, when you're looking for somebody who's missing, you're gonna look pretty hard, and that was a pretty key piece of information that was given to us a few years ago.
And we have to remind the listeners is that this wasn't just any average weekend. This was July 4th weekend. So if anybody was going to be up at their cabin during the summer, it would probably be this weekend.
Exactly. It was packed up there.
So it's, as I've told you, and maybe it's possible that Dave Combs, we early in this conversation, we said, well, it's maybe a little odd for two 20-year-old, 20-somethings to go up to see this fair. Well, it may be the reason that Dave Combs asked Erin to go up there wasn't to go to the fair, but to go to these parties that were going on at these cabins that were these parties that were being thrown by these rich Alaskans.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean,
Okay.
it definitely.
Here's probably one of the most, at least something that caught my attention. And we have to remind the listeners that you had said that for 15 years, nothing has gone on. Nothing went on. Of course, we've had some action recently. You told us, we talked about the call from the woman in Oregon, and we're going to be talking about a new detective. For 15 years, you were under the impression that really nothing had been going on in Erin's case. But you actually went up there and talked to the police. I don't know what year it is. You can fill the listeners in. And they showed you something that seems to contradict what you were thinking. Tell the listeners about that.
Yeah, I think, gosh, I was going to say 3 years ago, my husband and I went up to Alaska just to go meet with a detective and say, hey, what has been going on? And we were brought into a conference room, and because I called and said I wanted to see a copy of the file. And when I got there, we were brought into a room, and two very large binders were brought in that were Erin's case, and I was completely floored. I couldn't believe that they had done that much work. I mean,
How
I think
thick were these binders, would you say?
I would say the binders, and I tried to measure with my hand. I'd say about 9-10 inches a piece.
Oh
I
my.
couldn't believe it. So I felt better, I guess, that they had done a lot of work. And again, when I had asked for a copy of it, they said that, well, we can make a copy, but every date, phone number, social security name is going to be blocked out. So I thought, well, then that's silly. I mean, I guess I felt sort of appeased, if you will, that they had done a pretty darn good job. They just needed some leads, is what they needed. So I looked through some things, but again, it was so much was blocked out that I couldn't get a real feel. But they had definitely interviewed and really I felt had done a really good job. So I was like, holy cow. So I walked away from that feeling tremendously better. It's just something my family and I had never done. We'd never gone up to see how much work they had done. So I felt better about that.
It's very curious.
Very
Of
curious,
course, the
yeah.
police and the FBI get involved back in 1995. Not much comes of it. Of course, they talk to Dave Combs. They talk to other people. They accumulate all this information, but after that, doesn't seem to you like not much is going on. But then when they finally show you the file, they show you 2 binders that are 9 inches thick apiece.
Yeah. I mean, they were big. So
I don't know what to make of that. I have to tell you that I've covered a lot of disappearances, and a lot of people have seen police files. I think that is the largest file that I've ever heard.
Yeah, I was shocked. I mean, we were completely shocked.
Mm-hmm.
because again, like you said, we had not heard anything, and it felt like, again, for a few weeks right after she disappeared, we were on the news, we were interviewed, we were interviewed by the FBI. There was that went on, but again, as soon as that kind of roar ended after a few weeks, my dad went back to Baltimore. We kind of tried to go back to our lives as best we could. I would go out at night and hang up flyers all over the city of Anchorage by myself. But to see that, it was stunning, because it felt like we should have known more, I guess. I'm not sure, but I was stunned.
While you were there, you actually got to talk to the police, and you had told them about going up to the cabins. What did they say to you about that?
They said they didn't think that was a very good idea. I just said, what do you think about this Ted Stevens case and Joseph Bohm's? They wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And then when I said I went up there and walked around the backside of the cabin, I just looked. The cabin was for sale at the time, so we could peek inside the front door. I walked around the backyard. I just couldn't get out of my head that if there was parties there and she was there, and bad things were going on there, that I had to stand there in that yard and just look around. I mean, who knows what I was looking for, but we stood there for a long time, and the police said they didn't like that I did that.
But I want to get back to that just for a moment. You had mentioned Ted Stevens and Joseph Bohm to these policemen, and what was their reaction?
They wouldn't really say anything. They probably said, oh. I mean, we're not going to have a conversation about it. So I said, okay.
Anything that you saw, I know all the names, and anything that were redacted is, I guess, the word.
Yeah.
Anything in those files that you got to see, and I'm sure you didn't go through all 18 inches of them, but anything in there that could have been construed to mean that they might have looked into Ted Stevens or Joseph Bohm regarding Erin's disappearance?
No, not at all. I don't think I didn't look. I didn't even look for it.
Mm-hmm.
I think because I don't know if not interested is the right word, or didn't want to talk about it. They obviously knew about the case because it was such a big case in Anchorage. They didn't say a word about it. So I don't know what that meant.
Okay.
But I didn't look in the binder for it.
Okay. When their reaction when you brought up did they seem afraid, or did they think that, oh, here's some conspiracy theorist? What was your impression? What was your impression just saying that to him? What was their body language, if I could ask you that?
My impression was that I could be not safe doing that. I didn't get the impression they thought I was a conspiracy theorist whatsoever. I just felt like they thought I was like being like a rogue detective out there by myself or something, and they just didn't think that was a good idea. I didn't really get it because I didn't feel unsafe. It felt eerie maybe being up there and not knowing that those cabins were there because I hadn't looked before. So I think it was uncomfortable, me looking around in the yard trying to see some, evidence of a sister who disappeared 22 years ago, but it was the next piece of evidence I had, so I had to go look for it.
Okay. What have you learned about Dave Combs since then?
Again, I have learned that he, I believe, went to Diamond High School, that he runs a Combs metal shop in Anchorage. I looked at the value of the real estate. It was over $1 million that is there. I have
Does he have any
learned
brothers or sisters or anything like that? Parents?
he has brothers, sisters. He has, I believe, a brother who had committed a homicide and was in jail. I believe one of his parents is Native American, one is not. I couldn't find a record on him. I looked up, did some background checks and things. That's about all I know.
You don't know if he's gotten married since then, don't know if he's any children or anything like that?
I do not. I believe that there are some nieces and nephews. Sometimes it's hard to track who's related to who, but I do not know.
And just to say that one more time, you just told the listeners that Dave Combs does have a brother that committed a murder.
I believe he does.
Okay, you know what year that might have happened, or was that before or after Erin disappeared?
That is a great question. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Okay. Let's talk about more recently, very recently, as a matter of fact. And I'm going to give you whatever you want to say about this is fine. I know that you've had some recent conversations with the police. There's a new detective. What can you tell listeners about that? How did you find that out?
Yeah, well, I'll give you a little bit of credit, Ed, for that because I, got an email from Ariel up in Anchorage saying, kind of introduced the two of you and I.
Yes.
And so there were parts of the story that I just wanted to clarify because it has been 22 years. So I called up to the Anchorage State Troopers and asked for a Detective Gallen who used to be in the cold case unit, but they had closed that unit. So I was surprised that they said they'd actually hired a new detective, and his name is Detective McFerrin, and had a nice conversation with him, and was excited that he said he was going to read up on the case and see if there was anything that he could do or find since he was unfamiliar with the case. So I felt that was encouraging, having a new person look at the case with some fresh eyes. So he was supposed to call me back in a few days, and I'm sure we'll touch base here soon enough. So.
All right, great. I'm glad to hear
Yeah.
that's happening. But there has been the possibility out there. There was a murder of a woman named Bonnie Craig that at one time thought might have been able to be connected to Erin's disappearance, but you're not a big believer in that. Can you tell the listeners why?
Yeah, why? Because I got to know Karen Foster because Bonnie Craig was murdered about 9 months before Erin disappeared down that highway. I can't think of the creek. I think it's McHugh Creek that she was found in. And some people tried to make some connections, including myself, that was connected because they were two young girls that kind of looked alike. Bonnie had longer, darker hair. They were young. They were kind of clean-cut girls, and Bonnie, unfortunately, was murdered. Karen helped me figure out that it wasn't the person who had murdered him because he was actually in jail at the time that Erin disappeared. And Karen Foster, her mom, has been a great help to me. Just the stick-to-itiveness that she went through to find Bonnie's killer and use DNA and has done some amazing things. But she was able to find out that information for me, and she found out that he was actually in jail the time that Erin disappeared, because for a long time we thought the cases were connected just from the timing and that they were sort of alike in some ways.
So there's no way that this could be the work of the same person, not a serial killer type of situation.
No, he is actually in jail. He was sentenced, I believe, to 99 years in prison. I don't remember his name, but I can find out.
I do need to ask you about another sighting of Erin that happened possibly on that day. There was a sighting possibly of her, because we need to talk about this because I know some readers are going to happen upon it out there on the internet. A sighting at a donut shop. Do you believe this sighting or not?
I don't know if I do. I've been to that donut shop many times. I sort of don't believe it, only because I think we would have some more information about Erin, if that makes sense. I think the gal that spoke to her at the tattoo table really had a conversation with her, but I don't think they have that good of information. It was more of I think I saw somebody who looked like her down there. So it just seemed sort of some light information, if you will, and nothing ever came of that. And the other thing, too, is that donut shop is probably a mile down the road, and I have a hard time believing that Erin would have stopped to go get a donut when she was, lost or something. It didn't really make a whole lot of sense for myself or people in my family. So.
And once again, this is a sighting of Erin by herself, not Erin with Dave.
Right.
Run into quite a few of these cases where people say they have seen somebody, and it's really not the case. It's very common in all sorts of different types of cases. People trying to think they're being helpful, and they're not really. They're just... Sure. It becomes like a little bit of a wild goose chase, people wanting to insert themselves into the story.
Right.
What has this been like for you and for your family since 1995, Stephanie?
It has been terrible. I mean, I know people have family members who pass away in a car wreck, or they, in a boating accident, or, or get cancer or something, or they die. But when you have somebody in your family who just disappears and you have zero information, it doesn't ever go away. So you wake up, you think about it, you go to the grocery store, you see somebody who looks like her, and I live in a town in Everett, Washington, that everybody knows Erin and everybody knows us. We're well connected in the community. We went to high school here. Our grandparents, our parents went to high school here. I mean, we know everybody who is around here. So it's, you see all of her friends grow up and have kids and get married, and, and Erin's not there to do that. And so we miss her, and then not to be able to bury her. We want to bring her home.
And you've mentioned your father. I'm unclear about your mother. Your father took part in the search. What about your mother? Or maybe she...
Yeah, she passed away. She was, mentally ill most of her life, but loved us dearly. And, she passed away probably, I think it's been about 8 years ago. We were able to tell her that Erin had been missing and stuff. I'm not sure how much she comprehended, but they were extremely close. Erin looked just like my mother. So my dad is remarried.
I need to ask you this because I ask most of my guests, I should say, this question. Stephanie, what do you think happened to Erin?
I think that I don't think she ever left Girdwood. I think something happened there, whether she was attacked, whether she was brought somewhere, whether she was given some drugs. I mean, something awful happened to her, I believe, in Girdwood, and I think she died there. I think, I don't know, I think Dave Combs has more information than what he's telling us, and we want to know that information. We want to bring her home. So that's what I think happened. I don't think she left the state. I think we would have just heard more information, but I think something terrible happened in Girdwood that night, and we don't know what it was or what happened, but we'd like to know, and we'd like to, again, bring her home.
And we should say for the record that Dave Combs is a free man. He's innocent until proven guilty. And
Absolutely.
even though you may have suspicions, I may have suspicions, and I'm sure the listeners are going to have a lot of suspicions, he may be perfectly innocent in this, or it may be that just because he knows something that maybe he's held back for years doesn't mean that he is guilty of a crime. There's all sorts of strange circumstances out there, but
Correct.
we just have to keep our minds open to that. But it is possible that he may know some things and is afraid to say. It's possible.
Yep.
Okay.
I would agree.
Stephanie, where can the listeners find you on social media, on the internet? I'm, of course, going to be linking to like the Charley Project page. I know that there is a forum on WebSleuths, but I know that you're planning to start a Facebook page and maybe do some other things. What can you tell the listeners about that?
Yeah, I'm going to, I would say it's probably going to take me a week or two to put it together. I'm going to call the Facebook page Finding Erin Gilbert. And we do have a $25,000 reward leading to an arrest and conviction of the person who is responsible for Erin not being with us anymore. And we will put some flyers out. So in about a week or so, that page should be up. And we could correspond on that page. I think would be a great thing. My name is Stephanie Gilbert, whereas my sister is Catherine Gilbert. But I think this would be the main page where we could connect on. Or on yours, Ed. I've looked at yours and it looks wonderful. So
oh, you're very kind. Thank you. Yeah, the Unfound Podcast Discussion Group. A lot of good conversation goes on there, and I know that you're a member there, and I think you're going to find that it's a very safe atmosphere where you can communicate with the listeners. There's no trolls in there. Just not anybody can just walk in there and start saying things. So I hope that my listeners engage with you, in the days, weeks, and months, if not years. Hopefully we'll get this case solved immediately. But if it's not that quick, I know the listeners want to help you in any way that they can. So I'll be sure to link to the Facebook page or websites or whatever else, the things that may be coming as soon as they're up, as soon as they're happening.
Yeah, thank you very much. I cannot tell you how much we appreciate your doing this interview, and then any news that we could get on Erin is always helpful. So thank you again, Ed.
You're welcome. Any last words before we finish this interview, Stephanie?
No, I think it's good.
Okay. Stephanie, I deeply appreciate you being on this episode of Unfound.
Thank you very much, Ed. Much appreciated.
You're welcome.
And that was my August 2017 interview with Stephanie Juarez, sister of Erin Gilbert. I deeply appreciate her being on that episode over 6 years ago. I also need to thank a listener. Her name is Ariel, who made the interview possible. In the original summation, if you go back and listen to it, I did way more theorizing than I would ever do today, at least publicly. So for today's December 2023 new one, you're going to hear a more traditional type of commentary, with me applying what I think I've learned, and I should say what all of you might have learned about disappearances since that original publication date in August of 2017. First and foremost, all of you in the audience should be able to identify that this is the man said type of disappearance. Dave says he left to get help. When he came back, Erin was gone. And like many the man said disappearances, there's no proof that anything Dave said is true. No proof that his car wouldn't start. No proof that he went for help. For example, nobody has ever come forward saying, oh yeah, I remember him. He said his car broke down. And no proof that Erin was standing by the car waiting for Dave to come back. The problem, just because there's no proof, does not mean none of this happened. And yeah, Dave's story doesn't make a lot of sense. Why didn't he and Erin go together to find jumper cables? Now that we've identified the type, we can start looking at other disappearances in Unfound's catalog. Can they help us solve Erin's case? A good place to start: how many women have gone missing not long after meeting men for the first time? The problem: we only have one disappearance where we are sure this happened. Can you name it? The answer is Zoe Campos, murdered on the very same day she met Carlos Rodriguez. He murdered her and put her in his backyard, and she wasn't found for 5 years. Carlos is now in jail. Yes, I know there's speculation and very solid theories about other missing women Unfound has featured, where we believe new men caused their disappearances. Brandy Wells, Brenda Condon, Paige Renkoski with her encounter on the highway. But no proof this is what happened. In fact, we all know that women are much more likely to be killed by men they've known for a long time than ones they've known for just a week or so. Meaning, the stat is in Dave's favor. But just like the no proof section from a few moments ago, this doesn't mean Dave didn't kill Erin. This is just one more data point. Going back to Zoe's murder, what we now know is Carlos was a violent guy. In fact, that's what eventually led to his arrest in 2018. He had assaulted another woman. And it turns out he had been violent for a long time, well before he met Zoe. Whereas with Dave Combs, I've never heard anything like that. For example, has he ever gone to jail for assault of anyone, man or woman? In addition, what has he done with his life over the past 28 years? Any other missing women connected to him? I don't think so. What I'm saying is, a theory that Dave caused Erin's disappearance is certainly a viable one. Just as viable as it was in 1995 or in 2017 when the original Unfound episode came out. We can think that Dave wanted to do adult stuff with Erin, she didn't want to do that, and things got violent. Unfortunately, this happens every day on the earth, and is probably happening as I'm recording this sentence. But most of those men get caught. To continue to compare and contrast Carlos and Dave, Carlos was in his own city, in his own home. This is how he was able to control the narrative for so long, until his need to continue to rape women got him caught. Whereas Dave was in an unfamiliar city. All he had was his vehicle. Keep in mind that there's no proof the two went to the cabin mentioned in the interview. But somehow, if Dave is responsible, he has gotten away with it for 28 years in an unfamiliar city with only his car as a possible crime scene. Whereas Carlos could control everything and he still got caught in 5 years. Something to think about. One more point, and I'm not saying you have to believe this. All I'm saying is we can't forget about it. How many walk-offs has Unfound featured in the past 7 years? Many. With at least some of those missing people being ones that you would never think would go missing. Jamie Lee, Jason Landry, Kristen Modafferi, Helen Diamond, Chance Engelbert. What I'm saying is, although this is certainly a the man said type of disappearance, it isn't as clear-cut as Angela Green's, Rosemary Rapp's, Irene Gakwa's, and many others. So, how does Erin's case get solved now? I think everyone involved needs to start believing her disappearance didn't occur at the last place. If you'd like to hear and read more of my in-depth analysis into the disappearance of Erin Gilbert, please go to patreon.com/Unfound Podcast, sign up, and partake in the Unfound blog. Until then, I leave the public theorizing up to you. And that's the program. Right now, while you are in your podcast platform, Spotify, YouTube, iTunes, wherever, give Unfound a 5-star review, a thumbs up, whatever that platform allows. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've just finished this episode of Unfound.